All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another review slash something completely different because I was going to do Valador and then the Silent King for the Dawn of Fire came out and I would just basically did a complete 180 on like Wednesday. And then I listened to this book on like 1.5 speed. So it didn't take me 15 hours to finish. I would have done Valador and committed all the way, but I just this is the Dawn of Fire series and I am very excited to see kind of the lore kind of progress, because let me tell you, I'm tired of reading prequels, and I'm genuinely tired of the narrative basically being super stagnant. We'll talk about that later, and we'll also talk about that later. So anyways, the Silent King is the 9th installment in the Dawn of Fire series. Its purpose up until now basically has, like, the Dawn of Fire series specifically, not the Silent King, but the entire series, all 9 books. Its purpose has been to depict some of the events that lead up to the Dark Imperium trilogy, and the Great Work and Gene Father and Lion Son of the Forest, because those are like the modern day 40K universe. That's like where we are plot-wise today. The Silent King, in this case, is the close look at the ending of the first stage of the Indominus Crusades. Unnumbered Sons are being broken up because Gilliman is finally, like, if you've read the Guardians of the Throne series, the Chris Wright novels, or watched my videos, or watched somebody else's videos about the Hexarchy crisis, you understand that, like, Gilliman's actually under some pressure politically, because there is a very significant amount of the Imperium that think that he's basically here to just usurp the Golden Throne and build another empire. To kind of dissuade those elements, he's breaking up the last of the Unnumbered Sons into chapters, and he's basically just kind of telling people to chill. So Gilliman is doing his best, like, among other things, to maintain the tenuous control he has over the Imperium politically, while at the same time he has to contend with the multitude of threats that exist in the galaxy that is, like, relatively newly in this series split by the Cicatrix Maledictum. The chaos threat in the Imperium Sanctus has been stabilized, and to tangent off that, for those that you don't know, there's the Cicatrix is this massive rift that has split, like, the whole entire galaxy in two, and it is incredibly difficult for the galactically southern end of the galaxy to basically get into the other side. And also Imperium Sanctus, which is the Imperial held, they're both Imperial held technically, but, like, the northern part is cut off from the light of the Astronomicon, so travel is incredibly difficult unless you're going by the webway, or, like, you're a Necron that has, like, real space drives that can, like, get you around, or you're the Tyranids. Basically, if you're trying to use the warp, it's basically impossible to move around Imperium Nihilus, which is the Dark Imperium, which is the northern edge of the galaxy, or not edge, but, like, entire half. But anyways, so the chaos threat in the Imperium Sanctus has been stabilized enough, not completely, but enough, that now attention can be given to other threats, namely the Xenos threats. So, like, orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, not really the Tau, because Tau, it's at this time that the Adeptus Mechanicus unveil an intentionally subdued threat to Gilliman, that of the resurgent Necron Empire. The Adeptus Mechanicus has secretly been at war with the Necrons throughout the galaxy, and has, for its own reasons, kept that fact from the Imperium. So not only the war, but the sheer scale of the Necron presence in the galaxy, and the fact that many of the Tomb Worlds are awakening for an unknown reason. Now, it's unknown to the Imperium, but we know, mostly because of the title of the book, but also because of previous codexes and the Necron Codex and all that jazz. Like, in a meta way, we know that it's the return of the Silent King, and he used the Awakening protocol to full on, hey, speed up the Awakening. Come on, guys, get out of bed. We have a galaxy to conquer. So Gilliman, he's understandably outraged at the arrogant, secretive nature of the Cult Mechanicus, putting the fate of humanity at risk for seemingly, I mean, it's trivial to him. The cult loves knowledge and technological archaeotech and all that jazz, but he thinks it's trivial, and pretty much everyone else, because they're putting the humanity at risk for the sake of technological advancement and knowledge. They want to hoard as much as they can, and the Necrons basically have like the most understanding and highest tech in the setting. So Gilliman, with this knowledge now, immediately starts making a plan to assault the Pariah Nexus. Far from being alone, Gilliman commands the still largely intact elements of the Indomitus Crusade fleets. This, along with familiar faces like Ilia Natase, Cato Sicarius, Vitrian Messinius, Colquan, Shani. I will mispronounce that name because I only have the audiobook and they pronounce it Shani, but it's... Anyways, Saint's Gift, and she's the scout from Gathalamor, or also the Gate of Bones book, if you've forgotten her existence. But she is also the one in like Hand of Abaddon that like got gifted with seemingly saintly powers from the Emperor himself. Primus, Belisarius Cawl, Imelda Veritas, Order of the Argent Shroud, and Fleet Mistress Van Lescus, paired with Captain Agathe of Fleet Tertius. So it is a lot of characters, and it's just as complicated like to read as it is to like list off. So there's an equally large amount of moving parts, and to be specific, the book is basically split into like, I would say, essentially 4 books. Now they interweave and interconnect, and there's a reason that it's written in the same book. And Guy Haley does a great job of like interweaving all of these like narratives. So it's basically, there's a purpose for all of this to be written the way that it is. But it's also like, if you're not in the book and you're not devoting your attention to it, you are going to get lost, because there's so many shifting POVs and there's so many different elements and plans within plans, like doing the thing, that it absolutely is just like, all right, now we're reading about Vitrian. Okay, now we're reading about Agatha. Okay, now Gilliman's having like a moment. So yeah, for good and for ill, the book has a lot of POVs and a lot of moving parts. To be very specific, the book is basically split into like, and there's more, but there's like 4 primary-ish like bits, basically. So Vitrian is his own like fully fleshed out character at this point, and you pretty often actually get like whole chapters from his point of view. And then Belisarius, obviously he's a character. Gilliman, he's also like a pretty primary character. And then Agatha and like Fleet Tertius as a whole represent like a decent chunk. And then there's also Veritas and Shani, but you don't really see those last 2 very often. Like you do, but you kind of don't. And it almost, for me anyway, was just kind of like, you're here because you have to be, not because like you have a point to be here. You're just here because if you weren't here, people would be like, what happened to her? So yeah, like, I think Imelda and Shani were kind of like they were kind of the weak points as far as characters go in this. So the other 4, though, they're the main faces you'll see throughout the book. What this book does really, really, really well is the amount of references to other books. So like from the Vaults of Terra series to the Guardians of the Throne books, the Great Work, Gene Father, the Uriel Ventress books, Cato Sicarius books, like with Damnos, various Sisters of Battle books, and I could go on this point for a really, really long time. But the real point is that the book's main draw may be an expectation of Zarek the Silent King and Gilliman like duking it out in like a final climactic showdown. But what it actually does super well, in my opinion, is to tie up, or at least bring to the fore, like many vital threads that have been brewing within the setting for the better part of like 20 years. Because when it comes to like the Nightbringer for the Uriel Ventress book, that was 2002. Okay, so like Guy Haley basically had to take every Necron reference since basically 2000 and shove it into this one book in one way or another, and a bunch of other threads, because like the Guardians of the Throne books have nothing to do with Necrons, but they do have something to do with Gilliman basically coming back and presenting like a political issue internally within the Imperium. So there's more than just like Necron references to the universe. Like genuinely, I think this book has more references to other work than you can find in like 98% of Warhammer books, which must have been an absolute pain to write. And it might actually be like a turnoff for a lot of readers, especially those that are caught up and find this all as basically just one giant exposition book. But I think, and I want to talk about something else first. I think one weak point in the 40K setting is that there's so much information at this point spread through novels, campaign supplement, codexes, magazines, short stories. Now there's the animated series that are on like Warhammer Plus, and there's also like other lore blurbs that come out in like author interviews, that it's like genuinely a daunting task to like get up to speed or understand anything. Like there's a reason the meme of like talking about Warhammer, suddenly you're like, at the beginning of time there was the Big Bang. Like you can't just answer anything like with one sentence or without having it turn into like a 3-hour discussion, and then that eventually leads to the Emperor. So like there's a reason that meme exists, because it's real, and I think that's a huge weak point, especially for people trying to get into the setting. So it's daunting, and it's not often that all of this basically gets concentrated into one book. So it's a big reason that being like a lore tuber is so helpful to the hobby space as a whole. You're doing your job right and you're passionate about it and you're giving people good information, then they don't have to spend a decade and a half reading a bunch of books just to be able to be like, I know what a lasgun is now. Like, yeah. Anyways, and I think that this book, to tie it back into the Silent King, it's amazing that you essentially get caught up on current events and the state of the galaxy and a better understanding of like where the Imperium is and like what their actual mentality is towards Xenos and where the Eldar fall, and where the Mechanicus is politically, and just kind of like the state of them through just reading this book. That's great. That's amazing. So some people are going to like it. Some people are going to hate it. I understand this book is definitely going to be mixed. I like it, but I also my one gripe is that this kind of reminds me of the Wolf Time. It just feels very like, why are you making a reference to Leman Russ coming back and then making it nothing to do with Leman Russ coming back? Because you have a Space Wolf on the cover. It's called Wolf Time. And you're just like, oh, Primarchs have been coming back. And then they don't give you any more information. Then you read the book and it has nothing to do with anything. And it doesn't even give you like even a sort of reference to Leman. And you're just like, bro, what? Like, stop naming things like this and then giving people zero, just letting the hype build and then reading. It's understandable that the disappointment is like very real. And it's the same thing with this book. It's called The Silent King, and the Necrons do have a presence, but the emotions that it evokes of like, okay, Gilliman is on the cover, Belisarius is on the cover, the Silent King's on the cover, this is awesome. We're going to see like an actual like duking out, like mano y mano of this, and then it like, there's none of that. If you're there for that, you get like basically 3 maybe pages of the Silent King, and it's just like, well, then why did you name it the Silent King? You could have called it anything else Necron related, and then the Silent King would have been a really cool like reveal that nobody would have expected, and then that lack of anticipation and then a surprise reference would have come from left field, but you also wouldn't have to deal with like that disappointment element. So yeah, I think if I had a gripe, it's the title misleading people into thinking that this book is going to be something that it isn't. But if you kind of disconnect yourself from that, and I know that's not an excuse, but if you disconnect yourself from that expectation and look at this book from a perspective of like, hey, this is just a really good source of information and great read overall for like what it's actually trying to do, then yeah, I would recommend that. Because when I was my first kind of thought, and it took me like until 5 hours into the book to kind of start realizing that this book just wasn't about what I thought it would be about, my first reactions were like, oh, this book kind of sucks. Because nothing was happening that I thought was going to happen. But yeah, so now that we're on the topic of like plots and the happenings of the book, some example of the plots that this book brings up, it's primarily focused surprisingly on like the Mechanicus. Like even though Gilliman's in it, there's a lot of like Mechanicus in this. So the Mechanicus Fabricator General is confirmed to being actually dead, which is something that until this book has been like published, it's been like actually up in contention and not necessarily confirmed. And you'll understand because if you read the Vaults of Terra series, Ud Araskian, like if you Google it right now, like who's the current Fabricator General of Mars, like Ud Araskian is still there. He's still like, oh yeah, he's there. And like I'm pretty sure in lore, even when the council is like called to meet of the High Lords, the Fabricator General just doesn't show up, and the Mechanicus is like, he's busy experimenting or something, you know? Like they haven't told the Imperium that Ududi Araskian is dead. Also, because it would be really confusing if they did, because how he died, it's not easy to explain. Oh yeah, the Dark Eldar killed him because he was trying to make a trade so that he could get technology to stop the Golden Throne from exploding. You know, like the Imperium still doesn't actually know that the Golden Throne is failing. Belisarius, like a tech ambassador, like a tech priest ambassador, tries to show up and make a meeting with Belisarius, but then she gets like, she's too prideful to just tell Quo. And Belisarius doesn't have time for her because he doesn't know what the meeting's about. And then she ends up destroying the data regarding the Golden Throne failing. So Belisarius doesn't know the Golden Throne is failing. Nobody knows. And they also can't tell anybody else that the Fabricator General is like dead. But then in this book, they actually do find it within themselves to like confirm, hey, he's dead. We need a new Fabricator General. How about Belisarius? He's the prime conduit. Let's do that. And then he's just like, no, I don't want to do that. And if you've read Janefather and the Great Work and bits of the Dark Imperium trilogy, you know that he just doesn't actually want to be the Fabricator General because he's busy doing other stuff. Like he's genuinely trying to save humanity. And the way he's going about that would immediately basically kill him in the eyes of the Mechanicus, because you can't exactly vivisect a Necron and be like, no, it's cool, guys, like I'm just doing research. Like they would just burn you alive. So we also find out that there's also a not insignificant portion of the Mechanicus that want to become independent from the Imperium, or at the very least renegotiate the Treaty of Olympus. Like they think that's genuinely possible. Like the Imperium would like sit down at a table and be like, yeah, let's negotiate. I'm like, what setting have you guys been living in this entire time? Like, I understand that they think they have a huge amount of leverage, but it would have to be like a complete consensus within their own adeptus to be like, I understand they're an empire, but the way they are surprisingly democratic in that a lot of their power is spread throughout the galaxy, because the way a Forge world even is, just by the nature of a Forge world, they're already pretty independent from each other. So the Magos of a Forge world is going to see themselves as like almost an independent fiefdom within the Cult Mechanicus, Mars being kind of the, you know, the head. But there's a reason that like Metallica and like other Forge worlds are almost looked at jealously, because if one gets too cool, then Mars is like, hey, like we're the cool guys. You can't do that. But yeah, so there's that element, that subplot that kind of comes to the fore. And if you read Titanicus, you kind of get a much better idea of that specific schism. Like some people are doing it for religious reasons, and some people are doing it because like pragmatically they're just tired of fighting wars that they just don't see themselves as needing to fight, because Mechanicus is like, we don't care, and also we can defend ourselves, so why are we helping the Imperium with their thing? And also, because of the treaty, they're not technically part of the Imperium, so they genuinely think that sitting down and renegotiating elements of the Treaty of Olympus is like an actual plausibility, which I can tell you right now, it's just not going to happen. But they don't know that. And while we're on the topic of the Mechanicus, we also see Belisarius Cawl like properly pursuing his investigation into the Necrons through like extensive experimentation on inert bodies and other xenotech. All this to say, a drawback to all that goes like just basically everything that's going on in this book is the fact that there are so many points of view that it takes a long, long, long time to get going. I mean, it is a 15-hour read. The total runtime it just results in like a brick of a read. And what I will say is that all the characters get plenty of page time, and like nobody feels crowbarred in or thrown in for the sake of padding, except for Chaney and or Shani and Imelda. Like those are the only two that I'm like, I don't know, man. You kind of feel like a weak spot in this book. But if you're wanting a concise story that leads to an epic conclusion of Gilliman facing off against the Silent King, then you will be like completely disappointed, like just sorely, sorely disappointed. Nothing like that happens. In fact, the only time we see Gilliman and the Silent King come face to face is for like 0.2 seconds. They say like a sentence together, and then Ilya is like, dude, we gotta get out of here. You cannot fight this dude. And then Gilliman's like, all right. And then they just leave. Like he just ports out of there. Like, I'm out. Which I think is fitting, to be completely honest, because Zarek is like arguably one of the most powerful people in the setting. Like he is dummy levels of powerful. So I don't think that Gilliman running away and having such a short encounter with basically like someone who could probably 1v1 the Big E is lore breaking or disappointing. I would have actually been like, hang on a second. Like he's in the middle of getting like soul bled, and he's facing off against like a god breaker who is the Silent King, who's also been alive for like 60 million years. Like, I don't know, man. This isn't, I don't think so. And also, like, one of the best parts of this book is that the Imperium like cripplingly loses. I mean, like, the ending of the book is just like everything's falling apart. So that's awesome. I love watching plans fall apart. I mean, I do love me like when plans come together too. Like, that's cool. But when I see like stuff like slowly just fall apart and then like main characters basically get like gutted, I'm all for it. So I'm ecstatic at the amount of information that this book concentrates into one place. It feels hugely rewarding to have so much lore that has been building since as early as 2002 to be referenced and established. And much of what makes 40K in some ways like the lesser setting compared to 30K is the fact that there isn't a defined core narrative. It finally feels like there is something coming together, though. The Emperor is awakening, the Starchild prophecy is on the horizon, the Primarchs are returning, chaos becoming more active, the Yannari may bring back God of Death, which makes the Eldar coming back and being relevant actually a thing, the Tower becoming aware of the ethereal nature of the galaxy. Like Elemental Council, if you haven't read that, please read it, because it's great. Tau novels are awesome. The Necrons unifying like properly. You don't have to like read a codex anymore. Like you can actually understand like, oh, that's why it's taking them so long, because they are actually trying to be smart about where and when they engage the Imperium. They also are immortal, so their sense of time is like they're not in a rush. And then lastly, the Yellow King with the Pandemonium book. That's going to be massive. I mean, the fact that it's been delayed and the fact that Dan Abnett himself has like come out and been like, oh, like, and I know saying he's under NDA is like, yeah, that's like every Warhammer project, but it's like, he's also said on multiple occasions or hinted on the fact that like, he's not able to write it because it might tie in to Henry Cavill's like project. And I'll get to that in a second. I just want to finish rounding out this main part. So overall, I think The Silent King is like a really fantastic addition to the Dawn of Fire series. My only gripe is that it's incredibly slow, really slow. The title is a bit misleading, just like the Wolftime book that I mentioned before. And there's some weak characters, and I'm like, all right, like what is this for? But overall, I do think that this is like a decent book. It's not like a 10 out of 10. Not that I ever give any of these books like a rating. I also would say that like, I don't know if I'd like recommend this read to anybody who's just like a casual reader, if that makes sense. Like this is like a lore nerd's dream, but I don't think a casual reader or someone who just wants to see Chainsword go burr, like this would be boring as hell for them. If you're just someone that wants to like pick up a Warhammer book and like read a jaunt, an adventure through the grimdark setting, then this is not a good book. Like you will hate this book so much because there's not a lot here for you. But if you're like, you've read a bajillion of these books and like you're fascinated by the setting and you just want like everything about Warhammer, this is the book for you. Side note, before I wrap up, I have a suspicion that the reason we haven't seen major changes in the set. Oh, and that's also another thing. So tangent stop. This stagnancy element to the setting, yes. This book does nothing to like actually push the narrative forwards. You know, like you're not seeing anything that you haven't seen before. This just basically takes like a fine grit sandpaper and like reveals more about the setting and also like puts more into like definement, if that makes sense. Like it defines a lot more and makes it more concrete that like that is a thing. So anyways, the reason we haven't seen major changes in the setting or development in any of the, and this is just speculation on my part, this isn't like genuinely a fact, but I think the reason that we haven't seen changes or like major developments in the major narratives is because of Henry Cavill's Amazon project. I firmly believe that GW is kind of waiting to see what happens with that so that they can kind of put their major lore developments in that big project or in further kind of silver screen or smaller screen adaptations of like books or what would have been books. But now if Warhammer's transitioning to being like a media juggernaut, we're going to see a lot more of like an Avengers thing where vital lore elements are going to be through the TV show and movie adaptations rather than books. So I've watched more than a few author interviews. Also, Mira Manga, like if you want to read or see a lot of author interviews, somehow Mira is like able, and that's a channel, by the way, but it's also an author. Anyways, check her channel out. She has a ton of actual interviews with like Guy Haley and Chris Wright and Dan Abnett. There's probably more, but like I haven't watched like all of her videos. I've just watched a few. And as far as I can tell, she has like a way more access to Black Library authors than I would have thought possible, especially for the size of her channel. And the point is, I've watched more than a few of those interviews of the core Black Library authors, and I can't help but pick up on some stuff in like the way they answer certain questions or the questions that can't be answered, like they just refuse to because they're like NDA. That leads me to believe that things are on hold basically until things solidify with the upcoming show or like media franchise essentially. So with that being said, I'm 30 seconds early. Thank God. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next week. The book is going to be Valador this time, unless the new like Scouring series book comes out, Ashes of the Imperium, randomly. Then I'll have to switch tack again. But for the time being, it is going to be Valador, and that's probably going to be something I regret because Eldar books are just not known for being good. But I also want to know what's going on with Iniad, and I feel like if there is going to be a way, it's going to be in Valador. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I will see you next week.